Hello and welcome everybody to the Liminality interview series. This is interview number 4, I think. And I'm just talking with people about all things liminal. Liminality is kind of a complex topic. And although I do a pretty good job of talking about it in my book that's coming out next week, I just really thought these interviews would be a great chance to get people to start cueing into all these areas of their life that are liminal, they probably don't recognize. So I am so happy to welcome my guest for tonight's conversation, Kimberley Robb, who is among many other talents that this lady has. Is a holistic grief counselor. And Kimberley, that was one of the first things that my ears perked up and that I learned to love about you in the conversations we had when we met a few weeks back. So thank you so much for being here with me tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you have come to love this conversation of liminality as much as I do. So there's so many things we could talk about, really. But I'm glad for the chance to talk to somebody about the liminality of grief, because I think, as we both have agreed, our society doesn't really talk about that much. Like, there's not a lot of platform for discussing grief and the complexity of it. So, where do you think the topic of grief and liminality intersect? Why is this a liminal space for you?
I think it intersects in so many different places. Like there's
Mm,
the anticipating grief. So
mm,
just knowing that it's coming. And that's like having a loved one that is going through the processes of passing away and you just anticipate it coming. And we anticipate grief not just with someone that's passing away, but a relationship. You know that like feeling in your gut when you know a relationship is going to end, but you
yeah.
kind of try to save it. You do everything to disguise it, but you know it's there and you're anticipating it coming.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're talking about this, because I think there's this kind of expectation there, or a thought anyways, that grief is something that happens after somebody dies.
Mm-mm.
And
No,
it's not just after, and it's not just around death.
no,
There's so much loss. And so I love that you're talking about, yeah, anticipated loss as well. Yeah.
definitely. And it's interesting, like when you say grief, the first thing that comes into everyone's mind is death,
Yeah.
somebody passing on. But grief is everywhere. The loss of a job, it's the loss of a pet, it's the loss of something, or it can just be a change. I know you speak a lot in your
Mhm.
book about changes.
Yeah.
Grief and change is so hand in hand.
I think a lot of grief was experienced during COVID.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. 100%. So it's that transition, right? The transition before, the transition after something. There's a lot of liminality within the emotional side as well. Like
Mhm.
we don't, as humans, I don't believe, necessarily understand our emotions as well as we need to,
Yeah, or
and
be able to name them. Yeah.
name them and just know
What?
what's going on. So there's like that transition where I'm angry, this happened, I'm mad, but you actually are just in that space that you don't know exactly what you're feeling. And then you transition to another emotion. And then you're surprised and you're like, what just happened? I was just so mad and now I'm sad. Like there's a lot of uncertainty, unfooting right in that, right?
When we lost our daughter several years back, and the people had kept telling us, let yourselves grieve, let yourselves grieve. And my husband and I were both like, we don't know what that means. So we went and saw a counselor at that point, and he taught us about the grief cycle. But I will tell you, since then, I
Hmm.
do not consider grief a cycle, because that is far too fucking tidy
Yes.
a word
Yeah.
for the coming and going and the ebb and flow and the wave of emotion that all come. Like you said, you could be this and then you're going to switch into this, and it's unexpected.
I will never reference the grief cycle. I will not do it because A, not everybody goes through all those emotions. There are people
Or
that
to
don't.
different degrees.
Exactly. And then there are people that just flip-flop throughout the day. They don't know what they're
It's
feeling.
like
And
a
that's okay.
grief roller coaster.
Exactly. And everyone has their own grief roller coaster, and everybody's grief roller coaster can change from day to day to day. So to say a cycle where you go through the, no, no, life is not that tidy. Not at all.
Not that tidy. Yeah, not that binary.
Exactly. Exactly.
Uh, well, I don't want to cut you off of that thought, but I would love to also hear of like, as you're talking more about grief and liminality, what measures you think people like, how can we be compassionate with ourselves in those places, those crazy
Yes.
spaces?
So compassion is key. And I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's something that we forget. Even when we're not grieving, we just
Why is
forget to
it so
be
easy to
compassionate.
forget?
I have no idea. I always encourage people to speak to yourself and treat yourself like you would your best friend. The person you love that's always there for you, how do you speak to them? And then compare, how do you deal and speak to yourself? And usually people are like, oh my gosh, like that's
Not like
not
that.
not like that. So then I always say, look at journaling. Journaling is such an amazing way to discover how do you truly feel, what's
To be
really going
honest
on
with
in your mind.
yourself.
To be honest, because once you let your mind go and your hand just start writing, then you read back what you wrote. Usually
You'll
you
be
find
shocked.
something and you're like,
I
what?
agree.
Release whatever you're feeling. I know
Mhm.
us in our society, we're very much, no, no, you don't cry too much, but you need to cry, but you need to do this, but not the, like, there's just so
Yeah.
many rules. Whatever you're feeling, honor those
Yeah.
feelings, sorry. If you're angry,
Yeah.
let yourself be angry. There's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with that. Be safe. Don't direct it at other people, but travel through all the emotional states that you go through. Acknowledge yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the acknowledgement. And, my husband and I have had this conversation before too of like, well, what does it look like to let yourself feel the feeling?
Mhm.
And sometimes it literally is just that acknowledgement piece. It's naming it.
Just
I'm
name.
pissed. I'm
Mm.
really mad. Okay.
Yeah,
And that's allowing it. That's naming it. And there's power in that.
exactly. It's kind of funny you brought up your husband and that and knowing the words to what you're feeling. My daughter, when she gets angry, she stamps and she slams doors and she's mad. And I've had someone say to me, are you not going to go deal with that? And I was like, Sorry, what am I dealing with?" And they're
Yeah.
like, she's slamming your door. Yeah, she is. She's
She's
getting rid of
mad.
that emotion, those feeling,
Yep.
that energy she has. When I'm mad, I'm a smasher. And I know
Yeah.
people get scared. I just like the feeling of watching something explode because
Yep.
that's how I feel. It's getting it out. And
Yeah.
then I'm over it and it's done. And I've
Because
noticed
you've
with my,
processed it.
you've processed it.
Yeah.
For myself and for my daughter, if we don't, that's when you put a lid on the pot and then you shove it down and you shove it down. And we see people doing that all the
It's that
time.
pressure cooker that I talk about in the book.
Yes, it is. That's why I got excited when I saw the quote. I think
So
it's
funny.
amazing.
Green beans everywhere. I love
Yeah.
that you brought up your daughter. I actually just had a moment this week with my preteen daughter, um, who used her big voice with me. And she came back later and she said, I'm sorry for, I can't remember her words, but like lashing out at you or something. And I gave her a hug and I said, you know what? You are allowed to have and express your full
Mhm.
range of emotions in this house. And inside, I felt so victorious for like breaking that generational trauma that you're not allowed to have emotions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Let
I
her
love
rip, honey.
let it rip. And that
Yeah.
kind of ties into the other thing that I tell people about grief is rituals. When you say
Oh,
the word rituals, a lot of people get kind of nervous and they think
yeah.
about
Heebie jeebie.
witchcraft. They think about that. No, no, no. Rituals is just whatever you need to do to get through certain hard times. So for me, I love if it's somebody that's passed on, lighting a candle. I light that candle and I sit and I think about the person.
Mm,
Smashing things when I'm upset. That is part of my ritual. Taking a bath,
water
salt,
balloons.
all of it. When you have this kind of toolbox of ritual
Yeah.
that you can go through and you know that they're there and you use them consistently, it just makes it easier. Next time you're feeling whatever you're feeling or going through, you just go back to that toolbox. And I know you know that's at a time when your brain isn't really working properly when you're
Right.
grieving or
There's
when
no
you're in a,
logic happening.
there's no logic. But if you do the ritual, you do the same thing over and over, you just naturally go to it. And then you can come out of that.
So another word I could use here would be like self-care or practices. Okay.
Yes,
I love
exactly.
that.
I sometimes stay away from self-care only because you and I understand totally what self-care is, but there's
Yeah.
this kind of negative self-care
There
going on out
is. I
there.
was surprised to hear that too. You're right. I've heard that.
Definitely. But Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I love that. Rituals. And rituals are really just routine, regular things you can go to, right? And yeah, the concept of the toolbox, that's super valuable.
Hmm.
Well, I would love to hear too, one last thing, because I just looked at the time and I'm just gobsmacked at that we've been 11 minutes already. What would you say about drawing community in around you when you are grieving? What would be the significance of having some sort of communal connection?
We're human. And as humans, we need that community connection.
Yeah.
I am very much an introvert. I like my alone time. I like doing things on my own or in small groups. But I think with grief, there's a time to be alone and there's a time to invite people in to process this with you. There's an African tribe or group who, when they cry or when they grieve, everybody from the community comes and holds that space with you. And I
Yeah.
love the idea of me not necessarily having to shoulder the whole weight of someone passing away or the whole weight of me having lost a job or having
Yeah.
lost a friend, like a friendship ending or whatever it is, just passing on some of that to the community around me so they can
Yeah.
hold it with me, not just me struggling to juggle everything.
I love
Um,
that example. I don't think in Western culture we allow for a lot of communal lament, and there's such power in that. I'm going to throw you a curveball question that we didn't talk about ahead of time, but what do you think the difference is, if you'll riff with me here, between holding space for someone emotionally and being codependently feeling responsible for those emotions?
I
I had
love
somebody
that.
ask me this. I would love to hear your answer.
Holding space doesn't mean I have to do anything. So if I'm holding space for you, it is just me being there for you, listening to you, letting you have your emotions, and just being there, traveling with you. If I was codependent, I'm going to fix you. Let me fix this problem. Okay,
There's,
this
oh,
is
that's the
going on.
action step is the difference,
Action.
right?
I don't need to take action unless you ask me. If you were to say, Kim, I am grieving and I can't even cook dinner or I can't cook my meals. I can then say, hey, you know what? Let me cook you up some soup.
And then
You
you
can
can consider your boundaries and have choice and options, but then it's a
exactly.
conversation. It's not an assumption that I'm going to do this. I'm going to get fix you. I love that. Such good insight.
And it's
You're such a
also,
wise lady.
oh, well, thank you. I've lived many lives. But before you hold space for somebody at the same time, I always tell people, check yourself. Are you able to hold that space?
Oh,
Check
100%.
in with where you are, with your boundaries, with your levels, with your
Yeah,
emotions.
what is your capacity right
What
then?
is your capacity? A lot of
Yeah.
people want to hold space, which is awesome. I love that. But then their emotions end up bubbling over and going spilling onto the person in front of them. And then it becomes this whole big cup of mess. Check yourself.
You're so right. Checking yourself in your own capacity. This is something I learned last year. I've had quite a few friends going through some really hard times, and as I was, say, like gearing up in my writing, or getting ready for, like, last summer, the camp that I started recognizing in myself that when I would spend time with friends who had big emotional needs
Mhm.
and come away from that, if I didn't have the capacity to have gone into that in the first place, and I really shouldn't have, I will be exhausted
Yes. It just
after
drains.
that time with that friend. So that was like the first eye-opening awareness I had around that, was like, oh, I actually have to protect my energy,
Yeah.
even for friends who are struggling and need connection. Now, sometimes I will choose to break that boundary and spend myself for somebody. There's a
Mhm.
cost to it, though. And we just have to constantly be self aware. Do I
Exactly.
have the capacity for this?
And one step further is after you hold that space, release it. A lot of people will sit, they will listen, they'll be amazing at holding space, and then they'll go home and go about their whole day. You got to let it go as well because you've now
Yeah.
taken on some of that trauma or some of that
How
emotion.
can we do that?
I'm a fan of dancing, to be honest, because
Yeah, right. That's what I would kind of where I went. I was like, shake it off.
shake it off. You can
Yeah.
smudge yourself. You can speak, if you speak to God, ancestors, spirits,
Yeah.
whoever, let it all out, but
Yeah.
do whatever you need. And that goes back to your ritual. So, because I do spend a lot of time supporting and holding space for people, I know that night, if it's a really heavy, I'm going to go
Of
have my bath.
course.
I'm going to go outside and spend time in nature because I think nature replenishes me. It fills my cup and it takes away the stuff that I don't need to be holding on to. So having that toolbox again, if you're going to hold space, I always say every parent should know how to do this as well.
Hmm.
Because with your kids, you are constantly holding space and dealing with a whole range of grief related things because kids just they grieve more naturally than adults do. Something
Hmm.
happens, they cry and they melt
Big
down and
feels.
then they
Yep.
want you to help them, and then they go about their day. But you still
Yeah.
have it painted on you. It's still there.
Oh, there have been so many times I've had that with my daughter where she just will release it and she goes off bebopping with the friends that she was just fighting with. And I'm just like, in emergency mode. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so wise. We need to release that when we're caring for other people. Wow. Wow. That's a good one, Kimberly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. My only regret is that it is this short. So
No,
you and I have committed, though, right, to having this longer conversation on my podcast this summer.
100%. I'm
Yeah.
excited for it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So when Through the Portal comes out this summer after June, I'll just need a breather for a few weeks.
I hear
Um,
you.
but I hope everybody tunes in on Thursday. We're going to be having a conversation about the liminality of career change.
Ooh, that's kind of
So that'll be
cool.
an interesting conversation. Yeah. So thank you so much, my sweet friend. And everybody, keep being your authentic selves. Thanks for being here tonight.